Welcome back, listeners. So we spent quite a bit of time, Allie, in segment one, talking about, you know, test plots and variety selection and the importance of it. And I maybe thought I'd expand on and maybe just clarify a couple things. So we mentioned that, Allie, I mentioned the importance of having 30 locations, that's kind of really the amount of replication that you need to have a good plot set. But then I also said we plant 2 times as many. So I thought, Allie, maybe important just to walk through, number one, why is 30 locations important? And number two, why do we almost go twice as many as 30 in most cases?
Yeah, so if we look at why that number 30 is important, you mentioned earlier that the only thing worse than one or no plots is one plot. And that's because if you only have one location that you're looking at, and maybe you have a 3 bushel spread between the products, the odds of that product winning again the next year, it's basically a coin flip. It's a 50% chance. But if you look at when we get over 30 locations that we're comparing and you look at that 3 bushel spread, your odds go up drastically. So you're closer to 85-90% likelihood of that product doing what it did this year again next year. So that's why that 30 number is really important. And we find from our local replicated set that once you get over that 30 locations, you start to set that rank order in terms of product and their yield and the trend that you see. So it's nice for us that as we're looking at things at that macro level, we have enough locations to have that trend that's going to stay true, not flop around as you add more locations to that. And then I think, you talked about, so if 30 is kind of that magic number, why do we do more than the 30 locations? We talked about we get up closer to 60 locations. What that allows us to do when we have more locations is then we can start to break that data down into an even tighter geography than just Southeast Minnesota as a whole. So I think that's really important. As I come to your operation, I want to be able to get this as hyper local as possible. And so by us having this number of locations, we're able to look at that data at a much more micro level, which I think is very important for the conversation and all ties back into us placing products correctly across your acres when it makes sense. Does that kind of cover?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, we talk about that, Allie, and I think you and I which basically our geography kind of covers our listeners area. I think we had 27 that we planted, in our district. So, I mean, we came close to 30 in extremely tight geography, which I think is important. And one other thing, Ellie, that, around plot harvest and data quality, we talk about quite a bit. All of our, we talked about how all of our trials are planted by growers. They got to be split planter. They got to go a certain difference. The way you measure that data quality is important. And one thing that we're very adamant about here at Pioneer is that we do weigh every entry. So all of our entries in our plots are ran through a weigh wagon and weighed. And maybe just talk a little bit about our strategy and why we think that's so important.
Yeah, so I think, similar to as we've gotten done with harvest here, we're doing post-harvest monitor calibrations with our weights that we've ran across the scale. So by us using a weigh monitor for our plots a weigh wagon versus the yield monitor, you keep that consistent trend. It's pretty black and white when you're using the weights versus if you record your recorded weights in terms of yield and you pair those with maybe your recording of those strips in the yield monitor, you will find that the yield monitor, there's a lot of different variants depending on, maybe how you're sitting in a particular field. There's a lot of different factors that can throw off those numbers. I'm probably not hitting quite as in depth as maybe your take on this, Josh, but I'll let you.
You're in a track, and a yield monitor is a great tool. And I think if you had a calibrated monitor and you were just on the same corn, the same variety, that's the same moisture likely in the field, and just went and say you just harvested 12 passes in a row, I think it'd be pretty close. But in a plot where you're gonna, run maybe a 7 to 8 maturity spread, you're gonna have different moistures, different test weight grain. That's where that's really, you're maybe calibrated for a entry, but you're not calibrated for the next 9 entries, and that's where it can get tricky. And that's also important. Allie, when you think about plot data, or if you just think about a grower doing a side-by-side, I was actually down at Harmony today, and I ran into a couple of producers, and that came up, and they were trying to compare some side-by-side stuff. And like, wow, our yield monitor works good. But one thing, as we were trying to truly look at hybrid A and B, we really couldn't do it unless we got a weight. It seemed like through the monitor, it just wouldn't be as accurate as what we could find. And I've had some personal experience with that where, maybe someone's not happy with one of your products. And I had a great example a few years ago where, we were doing the yield monitor said hybrid A was about 25 or 30 bushel better than hybrid B. And by the time we got out there and did some weighing and comparing them, it actually turned out it was the opposite, that the one that the monitor said was way behind was actually a couple bushel better. So it can be kind of eye-opening, but it is always important if you really, really do want a good comparison of A to B, having a hard weight is important. And that's one thing that all of our trials we do, it's a lot of weighing work, but it does ensure that the data quality is as high as it can possibly be.
Yeah, so I think overall what we're talking about here is that, with our on-farm testing, it's just a really nice way to evaluate product performance. We put this in real world management settings, which I think is also an important piece of this. And then because we have the number of locations we're able to break out this data in a lot of different ways. So corn on corn compared to corn on beans, some all fungicide sprayed or all locations sprayed with fungicide versus not. So a lot of different ways that we can break out that data for you to then help aid in this product placement across your operation. But we'll talk a little bit more about important things from the field as we move in to planning for next year when we come back next week.
You've been listening to Today in Agronomy on KFIL AM 1060. If you've missed part of the show or want to hear more, check out the show page at kfilradio.com or with the 103.1 KFIL app. Stay connected with Allie and Josh on Twitter. It's at AllieGYSWISE and at Josh Schaffner to submit your questions for the show. Tune in next Wednesday for the next Today in Agronomy on KFIL AM 1060.